Hello, Senior School. Today we are going to have our Renaissance period lecture and continue our studies through the history of music. So, as I said, today is the Renaissance period. Just like the Middle Ages, the actual dates for the Renaissance period are kind of up in the air. There's a lot of argument as to when it did officially start, but most scholars agree that it ended in the 1600s, right at the beginning of that time period. So we're going to give it a 200-year window, and that's being a little generous, but we're going to give it a 200-year window from 1400 to 1600 AD. Now, let's have a little bit of understanding about what the word Renaissance means. It's from the Old French, meaning rebirth. More individualistic in musical ideas and purpose. People were writing music for themselves, to tell stories. Cultural movement in Western history that began in Florence, Italy, approximately in 1400 AD. So, right at the beginning of the period, it was a cultural movement that developed not only in music, but also through art and in the way the people were viewing each other and the world. Soon enough, however, it spread throughout Europe to England, France, and the Netherlands. One of the big things that marks the Renaissance period is the secular versus sacred world. Now remember, sacred music is anything used to explicitly worship God, and secular music is everything else. So this marks the passing of the European society from exclusively religious to secular, from unquestioning faith and mysticism to belief in reason and scientific inquiry. The world was getting bigger, other cultures were mixing with other cultures, and people's ideas were changing. So a few of the secular genres that we're going to explore in this video are the madrigals, canzona, and the recercar. And then there were still the sacred genres as well. People were still writing for the church, and that includes the mass and the motet. But we talked about those last week, so we're not going to talk about them today. We're going to focus on the new genres and songwriting styles. Vocal versus instrumental. Vocal music, there still had a popularity with masses, motets, and chansons, but the newest form of vocal music was the madrigal. Instrumental music was also a brand new idea in the Renaissance that created many new forms and styles of music. In fact, some might argue that instrumental music was one of the primary additions to the world of music in the Renaissance period, and what the Renaissance period was the most well known for. This included the canzona, an instrumental style derived from the French chanson. Maybe you can see how those two words might be similar. And the recercar, a new style of instrumental music. Notice these are all Italian words, okay? These were all Italian ideas. This movement started in Italy before it spread to the other corners of the world. And many other cultures, England included, was writing these new styles of music. In fact, we're going to listen to a madrigal written by an English composer. So let's talk about the madrigal. It was an Italian poetic form, used new techniques and styles in composition. It was a secular work, meaning non-sacred. It wasn't written to worship God. It had 4 to 6, sometimes 8 voices singing without any instrumental accompaniment. It used one particular idea called imitation, which is the statement of a melody by multiple voices in succession. Some examples would be a canon or fugue. In a minute, we're going to listen to the piece I mentioned before, and it will have a lot of examples of imitation in it. But one of the biggest parts of the madrigal was word painting, when the pitch and melody of the music directly relates to the text being sung. These were often also referred to as madrigalisms. So these word painting ideas were how the text and the melody and the music and the rhythm and everything that was happening there were connecting with one another. And they called these madrigalisms. So here's my first example for you of madrigalisms. This is Thomas Weelkes' As Vesta was from Latmos Hill Descending. He was an English Renaissance composer right at the end of the period. And on the left, you can see an example of word painting. I'm going to go ahead and give you 5 seconds to look at it without me talking and see if you can figure out what is going on that looks like word painting. Here's what's happening in the leftmost text. If you were to say anything about the length of the notes, you would be wrong. The duration of the pitch has nothing to do with it right now. However, look at the words that are being sung. Remember, painting words, madrigalisms, those are all connected from the words to the music. So the words that the singers are singing over and over again are ascending, the same, ascending, ascending, ascending. That's the big word that keeps coming up. And in those top two lines, you can see those eighth notes there are being sung with the word ascending. As they say those words, you notice that the eighth notes are going up in pitch. In fact, they're going up a diatonic scale. And as they're going up, the singers are singing the word ascending. So literally, the notes are ascending up the scale while the singers sing it. It's kind of a clever way to connect the words and the music together. Okay, now this one might be a little more obscure, but perhaps you'll notice it. Look at the one on the right. I want you to look at the text and I want you to look at the music and tell me where you can see an example of word painting. I'll give you 5 more seconds. Do you see it? This one can be a little bit hard to find, or maybe it's very obvious to you. Look in the bottom line, in the bass voice. He just finished singing the word Oriana, and now he is saying long. And look how long that note is. It is 3 whole notes tied together. And in a moment, we're going to listen to the entire song together, and you're going to see how it's actually much longer than that. So literally, he is holding a long note while he is singing the word long. Do you see the connection? Painting words with music. Here's an example of imitation. Now, this was the clearest example of it that I could find. However, it is not actually from a Renaissance era composer. But these techniques were invented in the Renaissance and were being used frequently. So it's okay to compare the two. This is actually an example from a fugue by J.S. Bach. And you can see how these notes and these voices just follow each other in a stepwise pattern. Look at the top section. You can see how it literally looks like a set of stairs going down because they're just coming in one beat after each other and continuing on in the exact same pattern. The only thing that's different is that some of the notes are slightly different from one another, but overall the harmonic ideas and the connection of the notes are all the same. So that's one quick and easy and simple example of what imitation looks like in music. And we're going to see that in 2 pieces coming up soon. So here's the first one. This is the same song, Thomas Wilkes, As Vesta Was from Latmos Hill Descending. Pay attention to the music and listen to the words carefully. The video that I'll play for you will have the music on the screen, so you should be able to follow relatively well. We are going to listen to the whole thing, so please sit back, just close your eyes or watch the screen and enjoy the music. And even though it's different from what you might listen to, I hope you're able to notice some of the cool things that he's doing, even as an older composer.
As Vesta was from that descending, she spied a maiden the same attended on by all the shepherds swain, attended on by all the shepherds swain, to whom Diana's darling came running down the lane, 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 running down a lane. First 2 by 2, then 3 by 3, then 3 by 3 together, leaving their goddess all alone. Hence they thither, and mingling with the shepherds Shepherds on the street with muffled shirts, with mirth entertain. Then sang the shepherds and hymns of Diana, hymns of Diana.
As you can see from that recording, there are a bunch of examples of not only imitation, but also word painting. For example, when they say, and 2 by 2, only 2 voices are singing. Then it says 3 by 3. All of a sudden, 3 voices are singing together, right? The words are matching with what the instrumentalists, with their voices, right? Their voice as an instrument, are doing. So let's move past the magical now that you've gotten to hear a prime example of it, and let's talk about instrumental music, the most significant contribution of Renaissance music. There wasn't quite an emphasis on solo instruments yet, but instruments were still widely used to play by themselves and to accompany vocal music and dance music. Used a style of notation called intabulation, which was the arrangement of vocal or instrumental work for keyboard and plucked string instruments, notated in tablature. If you are learning guitar, one way you might try to learn guitar is by learning to read tablature. Tablature is still used today widely to teach people how to read music. Here's a few instrument examples. There was flutes. There was different types of brass instruments, which included non-transposing trumpets and the sackbut, which was an older version of the trombone. There was double reeds called shawms, kirtles, and rackets. Stringed instruments such as the lute, the vihuela, guitar, and harp. We had our first bowed stringed instruments like fiddles and viols, the viol da gamba being an example of a bass viol, and the organ, clavichord, and harpsichord were the predecessor of what we now call the piano. And that is the example of keyboard instruments that we could hear back then. Two primary instrumental forms would be the canzona and the recercar. The canzona was an instrumental song derived from the French chanson, the transcription of French vocal music, which meant they basically were taking French vocal music and rewriting it for instruments. The famous composer of the keyboard canzona was Girolamo Frescobaldi, and the group canzona was Giovanni Gabrieli. These two ideas of keyboard canzona and group canzona later influenced the Baroque sonata and the concerto forms. We're going to talk about those next week. And lastly was the recercar, which is an instrumental work, which was either homophonic, remember a single melody accompanied by other voices, or polyphonic, where there wasn't a clear leader and everybody kind of had equal share of the melody. And they were often used to introduce other pieces, recercars were, such as a mass, motet, or canzona. And recercars included tons of imitation. Here's a first example. We're only going to play a few seconds of it. This is the canzona corta played on the harpsichord by Girolamo Frescobaldi. The man on the video is not Girolamo Frescobaldi, that is Gustav Leonhardt, who is the performer. He did not write the music. Even in that short example, you can hear examples of imitation. We start with one hand playing the melody, and then sooner or later the second hand comes in and joins, but at a higher key. This is Giovanni Gabrieli. Canzone Personale number 4. Now this piece is being performed on modern day instruments by a brass quintet, but it would be similar sounding in that it would be the same type of harmonies and melodies being played then. You'll also hear lots of imitation in this. Yes, tubas can in fact play like that, and they can in fact sound that good. By the way, trumpet players, do not look at that trumpet player's fingers. I can't believe his fingers are over the valves like that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. It's a very good performance of a classical Renaissance piece. You can hear the imitation, you can hear the little embellishments, the extra notes they add in to make it sound interesting. And lastly, we're going to talk about important composers. Now I'm just going to bring them up, and then I'm going to mention the very last one on the bottom, and he's going to be part of your assignment today. So be sure to be paying attention to this part. Some important composers. In the early Renaissance, we have Guglielmo Dufay, which we talked about last time actually. He was also a Middle Ages composer. He's one of those that bridged the gap. John Taverner and English composer Thomas Tallis. In the middle of the period is Josquin des Prez, who is an important French composer. In the late Renaissance, we had lots of Italians and an Englishman by the name of William Byrd. The late Renaissance period would be Allegri, Palestrina, William Byrd, Monteverdi, and my personal favorite Renaissance composer, Carlo Gesualdo. And what I would like you to do, and I'll write it in ManageBack so you see it, part of your assignment today after watching this video is to go and look up Carlo Gesualdo and explain to me in a document why he might be considered a very, very interesting musical composer. Okay, here's my sources because I'm a good teacher. And lastly, I just want to say that's the end of the video. I hope that you're able to learn a lot about the Renaissance period and that perhaps you actually enjoyed it more than the other eras, and that's perfectly fine. After you watch this video, you are going to go and follow the instructions on ManageBack and answer the questions in a Word document. And at the very end, you are going to take a test on Quizlet to show how much you remembered from this slideshow. All of that information will be on ManageBack. I hope that you are able to keep up with everything that's going on this week, and I hope that you enjoy your day off tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me on Teams and ask them. I'll see you guys next week.